In 1991, the Iraqi army under the leadership of Saddam Hussein was confident that the United States would not interfere with their invasion of Kuwait because they thought the U.S. was afraid that what happened to them in the Vietnam War would happen again, where thousands of American soldiers died. At that time, Iraq also boasted of having the fourth strongest army in the world, with over 1 million soldiers, thousands of tanks, and hundreds of fighter jets. But unknown to them, the U.S. had already assigned a feared general to develop a unique strategy that would bring down Saddam's powerful forces in just 4 days. This is the true story behind the left hook strategy, which became the strongest blow delivered by America and its allies in Operation Desert Storm. Mr. Good Vibes Shorts, yay. It was 1990 and the 8-year Iran-Iraq War had just ended, but instead of recovering, Iraq was buried in over $80 billion of debt. For Saddam Hussein, he needed to find a quick way to restore his country's wealth. And the easiest target he saw was the small but very wealthy country of Kuwait. He accused Kuwait of secretly taking oil from Iraq's Rumaila oil field using slant drilling. He also insisted that Kuwait and other Arab countries should forget Iraq's debt to them, because Iraq served as a shield against Iran for 8 years. But for the whole world, it was clear that this was just an excuse to justify his long-standing plan to invade Kuwait and control its vast oil reserves. On August 2, 1990, without any warning, more than 100,000 Iraqi soldiers, supported by hundreds of tanks and armor, vehicles simultaneously stormed into Kuwait. Their invasion was so swift that in just 48 hours, the entire country had completely fallen. It wasn't just Kuwait that was affected. The whole world suddenly became alarmed. With Saddam now controlling Kuwait, he could influence almost 20% of the world's oil supply. Even more frightening, his army was now just a few kilometers away from Saudi Arabia, one of the most important allies of America in the Middle East. If Saudi Arabia were to fall as well, the balance of power in the entire region could change, and the global economy could be affected. While the United Nations continued to condemn the invasion, one belief became even stronger in Saddam's mind. America had no intention of intervening. He studied the Vietnam War and saw how the United States got bogged down in a long and bloody conflict. He also remembered the bombing in Lebanon in 1983, where more than 200 American Marines were killed. This caused America to withdraw just a few months later. Because of this, he was convinced that when war becomes too costly in terms of lives and money, America will choose to stay quiet rather than get involved and fight. But there was one thing he wasn't prepared for. The America he would face was no longer the same America as in Vietnam. This was an America that had learned from its mistakes in the past. To liberate Kuwait, the United Nations began to form the largest military coalition since the Second World War. More than 40 countries joined forces, and the one assigned to lead this massive operation was General Norman Schwarzkopf, a Vietnam veteran known for his sharp mind. When he arrived in Saudi Arabia, he immediately saw the biggest problem. Iraq's defenses in Kuwait were very strong. Thousands of soldiers were entrenched in the trenches. There were so many minefields laid out, and their tanks were fully prepared for a direct battle. The general knew that if they went straight to Kuwait, they would be doing exactly what Saddam expected. So instead of facing Iraq's strongest defenses head-on, he decided to come up with a strategy that would deceive Saddam's entire army, a plan that would make them look in the wrong direction, while the real strike quietly moved around their left flank. And he called this the left hook strategy, which would be the first and biggest strike of Operation Desert Storm. On January 17, 1991, the operation began. But contrary to what many expected, the coalition did not immediately advance into Kuwait. Instead, they first launched one of the largest air campaigns in the history of warfare. For 42 days and nights, bombs rained down from the sky almost non-stop. One by one, Iraq's air bases radar stations, communication centers, command headquarters, missile sites, and ammunition depots were hit. But even with such intense bombing, General Schwarzkopf knew it wasn't enough to win. Saddam's nearly 1 million soldiers were still standing. Thousands of tanks were entrenched in Kuwait's defenses, just waiting for the enemy to attack. If the coalition still tried to attack them head-on now, the battle would surely be bloody. So while the whole world was watching the explosions from the air, the second part of the plan quietly began. The biggest deception in modern warfare. The United States deliberately allowed the international media to film thousands of U.S. Marines training for an amphibious landing on the coast of Oman. News came out in newspapers and on television all over the world that the coalition was preparing to attack Kuwait from the sea. That was exactly what they wanted Saddam to believe. Because of that information, Iraq hurried to lay more mines on the beaches of Kuwait. They moved their artillery, strengthened the coastal defenses, and prepared their best unit to face an attack that was never really coming. But the deception didn't end there. 2 weeks before the ground war began, a small unit of about 300 soldiers started to create a phantom army. They used fake radio transmissions, inflatable military equipment, heat decoys, smoke generators, and other electronic deception systems to make it look like there were about 130,000 soldiers preparing at the Kuwait border. For Iraqi intelligence, it seemed like a massive army was gradually gathering in the south. At the same time, more than 500,000 surrender leaflets were dropped from the air onto the positions of the Iraqi army. Written on these was a warning that a major attack from the south was about to begin. As Saddam's soldiers read these, they became even more convinced that their expectations were right. While the entire Iraqi army was focused on the fake threat, they failed to notice something hundreds of kilometers to the west, in the middle of the vast and almost lifeless desert. The real coalition force was moving quietly. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, along with countless tanks and armored vehicles, were slowly circling around the left flank of Iraq without the enemy noticing. This was the most dangerous part of the plan. If Saddam discovered what they were doing earlier, he could move hundreds of thousands of soldiers and thousands of tanks to block the coalition's advance. Just one wrong move and the entire operation could end up in a very bloody head-on battle that could claim thousands of lives. But if this deception succeeds, they won't just win a battle. They could break through Iraq's strongest defenses. They could surround Saddam's entire army, cut off all supply and escape routes, and force 1 million soldiers to collapse without them even knowing where the main attack is really coming from. If that happens, it won't just be Iraq's defenses that are overrun and collapse, but Saddam's entire plan for the war. By dawn on February 24, 1991, the moment that General Schwarzkopf had long been waiting for finally arrived. After 42 days of bombing and deception, he finally gave the order to begin the ground offensive. Up until that time, most of Saddam's army remained facing south. They were ready to face a major attack from Kuwait and the shores of the Persian Gulf. They didn't know that the real danger was actually on the other side of the desert. Suddenly, a massive coalition force appeared from the west. Hundreds of tanks surged across the vast Iraqi desert. They were quickly followed by thousands of armored vehicles and soldiers. This is the left hook, a massive flanking offensive that struck an area with almost no defenses. Instead of attacking Iraq's strongest positions head-on, the coalition went straight into their rear. At the same time, the 18th Airborne Corps and the French 6th Light Armor Division quickly advanced more than 150 miles into Iraqi territory. Their mission was not simply to engage in combat. Their real target was to cut off all of Iraq's supply lines so that fuel, ammunition, food, and reinforcements could no longer reach the soldiers fighting in Kuwait. While that was happening, another major blow landed: more than 40 helicopters. The 101st Airborne Division carried out a deep air assault and seized control of Highway 8 along the Euphrates River. This was the most important escape route for the Iraqi army. When the coalition took control of it, it was as if the only door out of the trap suddenly closed. To the east, the U.S. 7th Corps advanced together with British forces to crush the Republican Guard, Saddam Hussein's most elite and powerful unit. This was the army he relied on. They would be the main support when the heaviest fighting began. But before they could even prepare, their entire command system had already begun to collapse. The F-117 Nighthawk stealth aircraft continued to bomb the important command center. Meanwhile, the Tomahawk cruise missiles from U.S. Navy ships were hitting Iraq's communication facilities with precision. One by one, the headquarters fell silent. The communication lines were cut. Many commanders could no longer contact their units. Within just a few hours, there was intense confusion. There were battalions waiting for orders that never came. There were tanks still facing south, even though they were already surrounded from the west and north. Others didn't even know where the main enemy force was. At that point, it was no longer a simple skirmish. While many Iraqi units were still looking in the wrong direction, they were already surrounded by the coalition from the west, south, and east. Their communications were cut off, there were no clear orders, and one by one, all escape routes were closed. In just a few hours, the army that Saddam thought was unbreakable began to collapse. Because communication was cut off, many Iraqi commanders no longer knew what was happening in other parts of the battle. Some still believed that the main coalition force was still to the south. Others were surprised when they saw American tanks approaching from a direction they did not expect. The coalition advanced so quickly that many Iraqi units were unable to set up defenses. Instead of engaging at every position, the American and British armored units bypassed weaker defenses and went straight for more important targets. As the isolated Iraqi units were left behind, they had no choice but to surrender or be stranded in the middle of the desert. At the same time, some of the largest tank battles in American history broke out. On the vast desert plains, hundreds of coalition and Iraqi tanks faced off, but the huge gap in capability between the two sides quickly became apparent. The American M1 Abrams tanks, equipped with advanced thermal sights and fire control systems, could spot and hit enemy tanks from very long distances, even at night or through thick smoke. Often they were able to destroy the Iraqi tanks before those could even fire a shot. Throughout the campaign, it is estimated that over 3,300 Iraqi tanks were destroyed, while only 31 American tanks were lost in armored engagements. That's almost a 106-to-1 kill ratio, one of the most one-sided results in the history of modern warfare. As more and more tanks were destroyed, the morale of the Iraqi soldiers dropped even further. Many had lost their commanders, and many were out of ammunition, food, or fuel. Some went days without receiving any orders, and their desire to fight was gradually replaced by fear. Even the Iraqi Air Force was almost completely wiped out as an effective force. In 4 days, it is estimated that more than 400 Iraqi aircraft were destroyed, shot down, or put out of service, including planes that escaped to Iran and were never returned to Iraq. Because of this, Iraq had almost no capability left to stop the continued attacks of the coalition from the air. Once they lost control of the air, the coalition's fighter jets, bombers, attack helicopters, and reconnaissance aircraft could operate almost freely wherever they wanted. On the ground, there were entire units that simply laid down their weapons and surrendered. There were Iraqi soldiers who just abandoned their tanks and walked out of the desert, and others simply surrendered to international news crews because they couldn't find American soldiers to formally surrender to. Meanwhile, as one by one his elite units were falling, Saddam Hussein could do nothing to stop the collapse of his defenses. The army he had prepared for many months was quickly being destroyed in just a few days. By February 28, 1991, just 4 days after the ground offensive began, the coalition declared a ceasefire. The war that many military analysts expected to become another Vietnam ended much faster than anyone had anticipated. In less than 100 hours, the combined forces of the United States and 42 coalition countries managed to defeat nearly 1 million Iraqi soldiers. There was also a huge gap in the casualties between the two sides, with an estimated over 30,000 Iraqi soldiers killed or wounded in just a few days of the ground campaign. While 148 American service members were killed in the actual battle, in addition to that, approximately 60%. Iraq's tanks and artillery were destroyed or rendered completely unusable. The army that was once feared throughout the entire Middle East almost collapsed in just 4 days. But for General Norman Schwarzkopf, that was not the most important victory. The true victory was no longer measured by the number of tanks destroyed or the number of soldiers who surrendered. The true victory was the fact that they were able to defeat an army larger than theirs without having to fight against its strongest defenses. After Kuwait was liberated, many wondered why the coalition did not continue their advance all the way to Baghdad to finally overthrow Saddam Hussein. But General Schwarzkopf's explanation was clear. According to him, the UN's mandate was only one thing: to liberate Kuwait. None of the UN resolutions gave permission to occupy Iraq or overthrow Saddam's government. If they continued with the attack on Baghdad, there was a big possibility that France, the Arab countries, and other members of the coalition would withdraw. If that happened, the United States and United Kingdom might be left alone in a very long occupation of Iraq. On the other hand, Saddam Hussein could not accept the speed of his defeat. According to reports after the war, he was extremely angry and accused some of his top officials of treason. Some of them were reportedly executed immediately. He believed that there were people who failed him or betrayed him in the middle of the operation. After 12 years, the situation changed. The administration of President George W. Bush decided in 2003 to invade Iraq and occupy Baghdad. In many ways, what General Schwarzkopf feared in 1991 also happened. The U.S. stayed in Iraq for many years. They faced intense insurgency and spent an enormous amount. The war cost a huge sum, including the lives of many soldiers. That's why military historians often mention that if America had only listened to General Schwarzkopf's warning about entering Baghdad, they wouldn't have lost so many lives in Iraq. Up to now, the left hook is still considered one of the clearest examples in military academies around the world of operational deception and maneuver warfare. Sometimes the real victory is already decided even before the biggest battle begins. In 1991, General Norman Schwarzkopf showed that a strong strategy can outweigh even 1,000,000 soldiers. If you enjoyed this video, share and subscribe. Also, check out the videos on the right to waste even more of your time. If you liked this video, please share it with others and subscribe as well. Also, watch the videos on the right so you can waste even more of your time.